Hello, hello. Today, I
Hello.
welcome Babak to a Marketeer's Adventures podcast. Babak, you have a fascinating background. With very few words on your LinkedIn profile, you managed to draw my attention and curiosity. Neuro consulting, neuromarketing, behavioral change, creativity based on science, creative strategist, systems thinker, choice architect, connecting the dots. And you also have a podcast called Reimagine, where you explore the building blocks of tomorrow's economy. Fascinating, very, very interesting and thought-provoking subjects you're talking about.
Yeah, I'm
So
happy
I
you
would
like.
yeah. I would like to start this with your story and what adventures have brought you to where you are now in your professional life.
Yeah, thanks for that. When you read it out like that, it seems like I wrote all the buzzwords in my LinkedIn account. So, I don't know, maybe that's if that's
It
good marketing
worked.
or
It
not.
worked.
Yeah, it works, but it's true though. These are the things I actually work with. So, when you're going to talk about yourself, I don't know, like where do I start and where does a person start? When does your professional work start? But the short version is, my name is Babak. I was born in Tehran, Iran, 1979 in the revolution. And then because of the war, my parents fled to Sweden. So we became refugees there. So I grew up as an immigrant refugee in Sweden. When I was 20, I moved to Australia. I did advertising school there. So I worked a little bit. And then in Australia, Melbourne, I started a fashion label. And then I wanted to do my master's. I wanted to study more. So I moved to Toronto and did my master's there and worked a little bit with PR. And then I finished up my master's in South Africa, where I wrote my thesis, which was about, many years ago, I wrote about sustainable branding, which was a fairly new idea at the time. Now it's, mainstream. And then I quit marketing. I started a football management agency. I worked as a football consultant, as an agent. I worked a lot with Middle East, where I'm from, obviously, with Iran, and then with South America, a lot with Europe. And then I got back into marketing when I moved to Norway because my girlfriend's partner is Norwegian. And then I ended up becoming a partner in Trigger, which is a very small agency, independent. I mean, it's called PR, but it's really like creative marketing, problem solving, innovation, all that stuff. And it's been voted as one of the most creative agencies in the world, in Europe, in Scandinavia, almost every year. So we do really well creativity from a creative point of view. So that's my short version. I've also been like a fashion designer. I've been a football agent and a marketer, and all these things go hand in hand. A lot of the stuff we do today is marketing, whether you're gonna sell a football player or a project or a fashion label, or you're looking for investors and so on and so on. So everything for me is marketing. So whether I'm doing it for my own brands or doing it from the other side or doing it in an agency, we are at the branded age where everyone and everything is branded.
Yeah. So you're a neuromarketing guy, right? For our listeners who may be new to the term, could you explain what neuromarketing and maybe also neuroconsulting is?
Well, before I ended up being like a neuromarketing guy, I worked a short time in very short time as a freelancer in Copenhagen because I grew up in Malmo. I was between jobs and between countries really. So one of my best friends worked in Ogilvy in Copenhagen. So I did some freelance work for them, and it was quite a long time ago. It was like 12, maybe 14 years ago, something like that. After a certain time, you forget exactly, like 10 years, 15 years, it all blends in. But I was introduced a lot to behavioral psychology, nudging, all that stuff, because Ogilvy is I think one of the first big agencies who started use a lot of psychology. So I read all those nudging books, behavioral insight books. I got really interested in that. And then after that, when I moved to Norway, there was no psychology in marketing at all. So, already 2016, I tried to bring in psychologists to my agency, but it was just too far-fetched for everyone. And there were hardly anyone in Norway working commercially with behavioral psychology and nudging, all this stuff. So for me, I've always brought psychological theory to work. So this is not something new or a trend, but what neuromarketing in short is to be able to validate a lot of the ideas we have by testing different neuropsychological responses or neuro responses. I mean, it could be anything from eye tracking, which is probably the most applicable, famous ones, but for me, for me personally, the very, very, very important, but the least relevant one, I think, because what's more interesting is that you can basically test people from anything from very quick online tests, which is not about like direct brain response, but it's about your unconscious responses, which is much more predictive. A lot of our behaviors, and I'm going to get back to that, a lot of our behaviors, a lot of our preferences are more subconscious than we previously thought. So to understand and we cannot put words on those emotions when we ask. So when Daniel Kahneman talks about this stuff, he says 90% of our actions are unconscious. And then the 10% is when we put words on it. So marketing is a lot about the 10%. Why did you like it? What do you like? What do you think about? It's important, but that's one of the problems marketing has, because I believe marketing is broken. It doesn't really work when you look at the global numbers in terms of impact, because we're not very good at psychology. Because a brand, a behavior, it's not on the shelves. It's not about anything else. It happens in the brain of the consumer. So the more we know, so it's about understanding the brain, understanding those subconscious reactions. That's the short version for me, at least, what neuromarketing is. And then obviously there are many ways you can test with really expensive tools such as fMRI, which looks directly at the brain, which I don't think is even available here in Norway. You can do it with EEG headsets and eye tracking, those helmets you put on the brain. You can do it with your pulses, obviously, to see how your pulse goes. And then today, what's interesting about neuromarketing today, that it's been democratized. So there are some good companies and bad companies like everyone else, but a lot of the tests you call fast association tests. So you can do these tests online. That is the goal of those tests is when it's done well, it brings the subconscious reactions to the front to a stimuli. So you can look at a talking point, you can look at an advertising, a movie, a radio spot, or just a statement, like green policy is the best way forward for Denmark, for example. You can take something like that and you can test people's reactions. And working with it, it's much more predictive, it's much more interesting. And when you dive into it, I don't find it very complex to get the data. It just creates so much more knowledge and understanding what the real problem with, in this case, when we talk about marketing, with a brand is. Just for example, we can now test if a brand provokes a reaction to buy when you just think about that brand. If it doesn't, there's no point of working with growth marketing and sales and optimization, because your brand is not selling. You need to build your brand first. So we're going to get back into that, but I have a lot of issues with growth marketing and those terms as well, so I'm going to get back to. But this is the short version of how I got into neuromarketing. I got into psychology first. I believe marketing should be mostly psychology on top of that storytelling. That's the difference between a psychologist, because it's like we marketers are good at telling stories. So based on the psychological insight you have, you put storytelling and then you start optimizing. I feel marketing today just starts with optimizing, and here's a good line for your podcast. There's a lot of shit being optimized out there.
Yeah, this sounds very helpful for marketeers, and I had a couple of courses at university on neuromarketing. I was like so excited, but then I found it a bit difficult to implement. So do you have any tips, suggestions for marketeers on how they could use it in their work?
Mostly it sounds like I've never worked with fMRI. We might start working with more headsets now, but mostly we are now working, because this is very new in Norway as well. I think the easiest way to go into to find those providers that have the best online tests, that are fast association tests, that tries to bring your association of something. your implicit response. That's easy because you're going to do surveys anyway. So there's pretty much, if I'm going to explain it, think about almost like neuroscientific ways of doing surveys. So this is the best way to start, and this is where a lot of my work is. Like I said, I'd love to work with fMRI scan and getting direct scans from the brain, but I don't think that is even available in Norway. And for example, I studied at Wharton Applied Neuroscience. They do it there, the Wharton Neuroscience Initiative, but that's translated to Norwegian or Danish krones. That's like millions of krones we are talking about to do those tests. So it's more like heavy research, right? So you can start with online tests, online surveys that brings when Daniel Kahneman talks about system one and system two, and I think the system one is the one that is instinctive. So you have those tests that brings out the system one data. That is the easiest place to be, and 95% of my work is there.
And these online tests, are they created in a way that makes it easy for marketers to get those system one responses?
Yes, absolutely. There are some good, like anything else, there are some good providers and there are some not so good providers. So it's up to anyone, I don't want to mention names or advertise anyone specifically. It's up to anyone to do. And it's also depending on your needs, on your budget. But yeah, the ones that I work with, they've been developed by Stanford, Harvard, MIT, Singular University. So I actually studied with one of the scientists behind and I did the course in Stanford on decision making. So he's one of the ones who developed it, and it's used by leading global brands. So that's, I think it's up to anyone themselves to do the research, but that's where we're at, and I think that's a very good place to start.
Awesome. Now, when it comes to the brain and marketing, I can't help but think that there might be some ethics issues there. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, looking at my agency, we're famous for being very creative and effective, but we're not a full stack commercial growth, bring a new product here and we'll just shove it. So we do a lot of, for example, one of the big projects, that's not the only, like, I have a lot of neutral projects, like, a business to business clients. And then I have a lot of like socially positive projects. For example, one of my big projects now going into fall is to get more Norwegian families to accept, what do you call it? When you have foster children, but foster children with immigrant background. That is a lot of psychology we're talking about here. So first of all, the ethics, yes, you have to look at it. How do we use the brain data? And neuromarketing in some places have gone so far. For example, I think one of the states in America it's thinking about either banning it or having restricting it, because at its best, it can be and we are just beginning of these technologies. Well, it's 10 years old, but technology is improving year by year. So where are we going to be in 5 years' time? So definitely we need to look at protecting the consumers, protecting the humans, make sure that these kind of tools are not used like we saw with Cambridge Analytics and Trump and the last election or the elections that he won. So I think people like us who are on the forefront have to think about the ethics. There are some really standard parts that you have to be transparent about it, the test that you do, what are the end goals of the test. But I think in every country there should be a third party who checks. This is what I believe, that there should be a third party NGO, a setup that randomly checks all the organizations. And these checkups can obviously be not very transparent because there's a lot of important data, but to check, for example, if we do it, then once or twice a year, we have to release the data to this agency to analyze, to see what have we done with this brain data, how has it been used, how is it being kept, and to what end goal. Like I said, this is the beginning, but where we are going now, it's going to get stronger and stronger and stronger. And yeah, you can definitely push people in the right or wrong direction. So for me, I can say hey, our agency works a lot with sustainability, social issues. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm lying, but maybe let's say I'm right. That's just my agency. What are you going to do with the rest? What are you going to do with lobbying company? Take care of that, Depends on your political stance. And imagine far right governments getting hold of this. So yeah, it's a bit. And with brain scanning, you can almost today with advanced brain scanning, we're at the part where we can see people's reaction without them putting words on it. So, I was born in Iran. Imagine you can go down to the airport in Tehran and they can show the pictures of the dictators. Your brains cannot lie. You know what I mean? It's like the ultimate lie detecting test in the future. So these technologies, if not there, I know some people are working on it. In a 5 years period, I think that's going to be mainstream. So yeah, this is something to look at. The ethics behind it is going to be extremely complex. You shouldn't leave it to individual companies and their trust. There has to be an oversight, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you also had an episode about nudging for more sustainable living.
Yes.
Yeah, nudging can be used in good ways and bad
Mm.
ways. Yeah, what kind of projects do you have for the good types of nudging other than sustainable living and the families
Well, last
accepting
year I
more?
had this campaign. We use behavioral insight. We use behavioral insight, the idea of loss aversion, that people are more afraid of losing what they have and gaining something. So we use those principles and then we work with Norwegian Matvet, which is a NGO that is made to reduce food waste. And the campaign had I mean, obviously one campaign cannot change uh, people's behaviors when it comes to anything really. But the campaign was so efficient, and it was so efficient compared to the money spent on the campaign as well. So it won a lot of creativity prizes, which is nice for us, but creativity prizes is an individual thing for the industry. It won a lot of effect awards when they looked at the effect of it. And it was also chosen as the best sustainability campaign in PR campaign in Northern Europe. I think in Scandinavia, I think last year. Or I can't remember if it was whole of Europe or Scandinavia. And definitely one of the best sustainability campaigns in Norway. So this is one of the examples how we use behavioral insight, the ideas of loss aversion, and created campaign that help reduce people's put that on top of mind, food waste, and help
Congratulations.
them reduce it. Yeah. Thanks.
Very cool. Okay, so we go into you had an episode on collaboration in the future. Actually, there were many things that stood out from your podcast, like will dopamine shape the future of humankind? And
Yes.
imagine a currency that enables and promotes cooperation instead of competition.
Yes.
And an alternative perspective on creativity, one that champions collective flourishing over profit-driven motives. Yeah, I don't see companies wanting to do that. So
No, you're right.
I don't see many moving towards this collective flourishing.
No.
But people, employees, including me, want to contribute more to society.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how would you say we can make this shift from bottom up
Well,
to
first
more
of all,
collaboration?
we are a collaborative species, and this is the story of capitalism, the story of Western culture, which is so many amazing things about it. That's what my family wanted to move to West. And since I've been living mostly in Western countries since I was 6 years old, I feel more Western than Persian because I only lived there for 6 years. But I have an understanding. I lived in Spain, I lived in South Africa, I've born in Iran. So, as I said, I've lived in all the continents before, besides South America. So I know just from my own interest as well. There's this story about the supreme individual. Elon Musk created Tesla. No, a lot of amazing. I mean, Elon Musk, he's done really well. I don't, some people hate him, some people don't, but I'll just use him as a very famous person example, right? But it's also like just one thing. With starting Tesla, he got a loan, $1 billion loan from the government, and then he got all the amazing research and scientists and all the people. So it's not, I mean, he's been amazing in doing Tesla, but no one does it alone. But in Western culture, there's always this supreme individual that does it. So when it comes to cooperation, humans like animals are a cooperative species. But then it goes back to the structures. So you have to look at, and then, it becomes very pretentious to talk about capitalism, but we have this crazy capitalism right now that is all about just about who can win. So you're right. The companies I work a lot with sustainability don't care about sustainability. That's why you have so much greenwashing, because the rules of the game are not made for cooperation and sustainability. The structures of business, the structures of our economy. That's why the episode I created with Will Ruddock, who was an economist from Stanford who moved to Kenya and created the Bangla Pasa, which is the currency. So we decide how currencies work, because money is just before it became, now it's an electrical thing, but if it was a piece of paper or a coin, it doesn't live, it doesn't breathe, it doesn't decide, we decide. And we talked about economy as if it's law of nature. No, there's a lot of good things with capitalism. It helped us a lot. But today, our problems are so huge that no individual can fix it itself. Our problems are so global that no state can fix it themselves. You know what I mean? If China makes the air dirty, for example, in Norway, you're going to get, well, let's take COVID. We don't know exactly how it started, but if we go by the story of it happened in a market in Wuhan, or the conspiracy, or I don't know if it is conspiracy, or it happened in a laboratory in Wuhan. By the end of the day, it happened on the other side of the world, in a city, in a place 99% of Norwegians wouldn't know even where it is. And it influenced every single person on this planet. So we're in it together, all those stuff, but we don't have a system. We don't have a economic system, capitalism, that works for that brings out cooperation. It's actually a system that brings out selfishness, and that's beyond debate. It's about the individual. So that's why you have also a lot of the Boris Johnsons, the Donald Trumps. Never before, at least in modern time, we have seen so many, not just people that I say it's not about my politics, I don't like them, but supremely selfish individuals, because this is how you win within the system. So you have to change our rules of engagement. You have to change how corporates are created. But if you want to talk about cooperation, there's one episode I did about the most fascinating company in the world, which is in the Basque country, and they have all the people that own it, all the people, pretty much everyone who works it's truly a co-op, and it does really well. It's one of the few Spanish industries that survived their own revolution when Franco left, and then survived the European Union when Spanish industry died out, and they're owned by their own members. No person in the organization makes them at top. You talk about the lowest servant in an organization or a CEO, there's just 8 times more money compared to American companies that could be 400 times. So there are places in the world where we have created money that brings out cooperation, that we have brought companies that are doing really well, that are actually owned by the people who work in it. They make those decisions together. So for example, during bad economic times, if section A is doing well and section B is not doing well, section A's salary will go down, so they don't have to fire a lot of people in section B, because they've seen, I mean, if they take their choices right, they see that maybe in 2 years' time section B will do better because society changes or demand changes. So this is how they work, and there are very few people who, and that region, in the Basque region, is one of the most wealthy, healthy regions in Spain. Less crime, more trust. So it just shows how a company, and a lot of how a company can create cooperation, can create these things. So it's about the systems. It's the systems in place. The current system is about individualism, and it's about winning. Winner takes it all. So yeah, you're right. In this world today, we have very little cooperation and very little sustainability. So we need to change our monetary system, our political system radically going forward, I believe.
That's a tough one. How do you think creative professionals, such as marketeers, can help bring this change? Is there?
They can.
Yeah.
I can tell you right now, because we are the foot soldiers of capitalism. And change doesn't, there's this romantic idea that marketers should change, but no, like I said, I don't work a lot with commercial, so we push a lot of our clients to do a lot of more sustainable work, like true social responsibility. Yes, they put a little bit of money down the line, but that's why our agency wins more awards than wins more money, because we don't just push products. I don't think I'm very for me it's very strange. Every now and then some marketers go out and say, let's change. Yes, change can come from either from bottom up or bottom down, but it cannot start with marketing, because we are the foot soldiers of capitalism. This is the wrong place to look for change. The change, again, has to be, in this case, it has to be on the top. Then if it's the people who push for a change, but it has to be different economical models, because when you start a new year, Q1 economical year, I mean, you studied what is finance? You studied finance, so you know this. It's a growth
Economics.
economics, so it's a growth paradigm. Your Q1, your Q2 has to be better than Q1, and your Q3 has to be better. And we're at the time when this is not only that it's not sustainable, it's not natural. I mean, what happens when we stop? It's very good not to consume, right? It's very good not to consume for nature, but then the economy crash, right? So even I'm sitting there thinking about sustainability, or what happens if people. So we're at I don't even understand how anyone can look at this different, because our economical model, we need to consume a lot. Basically, we need to buy a lot of shit we don't need. We need to buy a lot of shit from Amazon, from Temu, from AliExpress, from these cheap stores, and we just need to get these wheels going. It's unhealthy. It's definitely unsustainable. And I'm sorry to say that, but I'm being from Iran myself. I'm delighted to see the forest fires in Greece personally. I'm delighted to see what's happening, because especially Southern Europe has been lagging in this. Now you see what's been happening, what people have said. Now Kos yesterday burned down, or it was burned. Last year it was Rhodos. What's going to happen to already destroyed Greece economy when it takes 2 more summers? Then Scandinavia, we work with tourism, Norwegian tourism. All the reports show that the next wave of tourism will be from Germany upwards, because no one wants to go somewhere. And you saw what happened with the poor English doctor. The whole world followed that news, probably died of heat stroke. We think, over 40 degrees. One of my best friends from Malta. I always go there. It's always over 40 degrees. You can't be in Southern Europe. So when I say I'm happy, I don't mean it this way, but now, it comes to the point where you say change is tough. I think in the next 5, 6 years, you will see Southern Europe being one of the leading regions instead of Scandinavia and those places when it comes to sustainability, because now they're getting it. Now they're hitting it. And unfortunately, we need to be hit seriously first before we start those actions. And within the new paradigm of economics, what marketers can do, because marketers are good storytellers and hopefully, according to me, should be good psychologists. We should create the demand for more sustainable living. But we cannot do it right now, because who wants to have sustainable living? Nike doesn't. Nike needs to sell shoes. Adidas needs to sell shoes. The food store needs to just keep. We need to overeat. You know what I mean? But with a better, more healthy economy, our work should be to create the same demand we have done for all the shit we don't need in society, to create demand for healthier food, healthier lifestyle, healthier, better ways of traveling, for example, better ways of cooperating with each other. So we can use the same creativity and the same knowledge that we have, but hopefully for something that is more sustainable. But that does not start with marketing. That starts with much higher up, our economic models and social models.
Yeah, my thinking with marketeers was that as good storytellers, they could start creating the new narrative that is needed for change.
True.
But you're saying that the best thing we can do right now is make better choices of employers, and work for more sustainable companies and
Yeah,
promote
vote
sustainable
radically
products.
green. Yeah, I vote radically green. You know, I interviewed over 30 people. I'm not even sure if there are any really sustainable brands out there. Very few. You know, all the experts I talk to keep talking about Patagonia. I always ask them, do you have more? Yeah, there's a small brand maybe in Greece, another dude in Portugal doing something beautiful there. Someone in England or Scotland's created this, you know, health shop that is, but there's far and few between. So again, yes, we should create those demand, but who's going to pay for it? Who's going to pay for that demand? Somewhere along the line, a sustainable word is a word with less consumption. So when you have green growth, green consumption, these things do not, you know, it's impossible. And I'm very critical to economics because I think that there's this big universe that is never ending, and on this little planet, and this little idea that is called capital economics, these are the only living creatures that we know of that think that something can grow forever. The laws of universe, nothing can grow forever before it collapses. So somewhere along the line, you don't, if, whether you're religious or not religious, if you understand the universe or you don't understand the universe, you just need to understand nothing in the universe can grow until it collapses. So you have to ask yourself, are these tiny little creatures on this planet economic people right, or is the laws of universe right? Because this economy keeps collapsing over and over again, and there will be a big collapse because we cannot go on like this. So again, it goes back to, so how can we change? For me, you know, we go beyond marketing. It's to vote radically green. And then we have to start creating those demands, and we have to look at our monetary and financial systems. Yes, we marketers can create, and within those changes, we can create the narratives. Absolutely, we have an important role to play. But right now, it's very hard to do it because who pays us? The Coca-Colas and the Nikes and the Amazons, those are the ones that are paying. So, for example, why is when it comes to neuroscience, why has it gone so much into marketing? Because pretty much so many of brain scientists today are working in marketing because that's where the money is. It is the marketers and the link between Stanford and Silicon Valley. Those are the people who are paying for all those amazing experiments that, for example, I put up on Facebook, how Apple and Samsung work on neuromarketing. You know, they deep into people's brains that is so interesting. How Coca-Cola and Pepsi work with neuromarketing, you know. I know Mars Group works a lot with neuromarketing. You know, I love Mars, I love Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Nike, Adidas, all these brands, but how much of that do we need? You know, those are the people who are looking into our brains and then pushing it more. So, yeah.
Yep. And then they convince people to consume products that are not good for anyone.
No,
So,
absolutely not. I mean, I like to drink Coca-Cola, but if you drink it 2, 3 liters a day, or Pepsi, or like soft drinks, so all these products are amazing. But again, my point is that where we are right now, we have to be honest about what work is. Our work is to drive consumption, and if that's going to change, again, there's a that like as I explained, it's much more complex. So I find it. So I'm talking about that because I find it when marketers, because a lot of marketers are seeing this problem. A lot of marketers are very liberal, but I think there needs to be a little bit more understanding. Who, you know, just go back to your own agency and see who's paying you. And if you ever been to a sustainability meeting, you see how little money there is involved in that compared to the big commercial campaigns, because that's what brings business forward.
so are you saying that change will only come when everything starts? Well, it's already started breaking down, but when more and more things are breaking down in society?
Yeah, unfortunately, like I haven't been to Greece for ages, but I spent a lot of time in Spain and Malta. I mean, they don't care about sustainability, about it's not something that it's top of the agenda. There are not a lot of green parties in those regions of Europe. But now they are seeing, like, look, I was in Lyon last year and I talked to food producers. You know, it's one of the most leading regions for food and wine. Now they are buying new vineyards, different parts of France from the Lyon region because it's getting too hot, right? When these things happen, then they understand they need to radically instead of fighting, and all this stuff are important, fighting about immigration or wokeness or, this and that. This, of course, I mean, I spoke to French winemakers. You should hear them talk about the climate now. You should hear them talk about the climate change. I don't know if they're going to vote green. That's not my thing. But these are the people who've seen it, who understand it. They are the people on the forefront of the climate change. So it's very unfortunate what's happening in Greece. But if they want to be able to have any sort of economy linked to tourism, look, one of my best friends, he was on a plane. He had rented out his own house in Sweden for Airbnb. He's sitting on a plane lifting towards Rhodos with his children when they had to cancel the trip because Rhodos was burning last year. Now, last night, same thing happened to Kos. It happened in Portugal. When people get evacuated, we hear these stories. If it's not me, it's my friend. So how much longer are Scandinavians going to book a July vacation in Southern Europe? When that stops happening, then they see that, okay, now we need to start doing something serious.
Definitely. I sure hope so. I sure hope
So
that
we're moving a
happens.
little bit away from marketing, but yeah, that's the role of marketing there. Hopefully to create better demand for sustainable behaviors more than products. But someone needs to pay for that, right? There needs to be on the top, there needs to be some interest for that to happen.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, so we ground ourselves more and go into the everyday.
Sure.
So how does your average work day look like? Um, yeah, and
Yeah,
yeah, I'll go into the next question after.
sure. I work a lot with, like, I'm a planner, so a lot of insight. So I guess, like, for example, I'm very lucky because I get to deep dive. I get to deep dive. So we had this huge pitch for Netflix recently. I hope we can win it. Like, it was one of the biggest pitches we've had, at least this year. So I deep dive to everything about streaming, the business models behind. I interviewed actors. We did a neuroscientific competition. What do you call it? Um, a competitive analysis based on neuroscience to understand the deep emotions people have towards, HBO and HBO Max and Prime and Netflix. So I got to deep dive into that. Like I said, I don't work a lot with like pushing products, but right now just for a few days, I'm deep diving a lot in the world of ice cream, what's happening there, I mean, it's my favorite dessert, ice cream, so I kind of understand but even more, what drives the demand. This ice cream we're representing is very Norwegian, very nostalgic. All the products produced are made in Norway. So I'm looking, does that drive behavior if it's made here? So I'm going into that, and then I'm going into the whole foster care thing. So I'm a bit privileged because I get time and effort to deep dive into something, and always I end up with psychology as much as I can
Hmm.
to understand those deep drivers, even for something as simple as ice cream, to something as very serious as foster care. So my job is to deep dive depending on what the brief is. I get the time and the effort to, and I do a lot of, because Norway is, because of a small country and because of the culture, they do a lot of quantitative surveys. So I always get these quantitative surveys from clients. They've asked anything from 1,000 people or even more. So the quantitative is always there, but very little qualitative. And I think this is because of the social democratic, let's ask everyone. But it's also a very small market. A lot of brands don't feel the need to deep dive. So I deep dive a lot of qualitative interviews. But again, as I said before, 90% of our behaviors, we cannot even put words on it. And then as much as I can, I try to, if the budget is there, and we're new with neuromarketing in Norway, so not everyone's get going on it, but to get them to understand, to deep dive also even deeper psychology. So I deep dive into humans' minds, into interviews, into what is happening in that part of I would say the word, but in that industry or in that space. So that's what, and then I write the insights and the strategy and the value proposition and these things.
What do you find the most fulfilling in your work?
I guess it's like many other people, it's I think it's funny, the way I talk about capitalism. I know so many, like, for example, we had this, when there was this election in Norway, all the agencies did their mock election, and then a lot of these people voted for the Green Party. And then you can say, how can you work in marketing, advertising, and work for the Green? Like, my agency was 70%, 75%. Another agency was 70% that my friends worked at. How can people that, it's because I think people are really liberal. Creative people tend to be more liberal than like not very conservative. If you compare, for example, people who work in law and in finance, more of the green, red voters. But so I think that it's not always the commercial part of the client. I mean, always you have to keep the clients happy to have a smooth working relationship, and to have work. But I think what's most fulfilling is when you solve a complex problem. I think that's what I know a lot of my colleagues love. I think that, to be perfectly honest, I think a lot of marketers love that more than they love their clients' brands, because we work with Coca-Cola, and then maybe some years you can work with Pepsi, or you work with Burger King or McDonald's. You always work with someone, and then maybe you end up with the competitors because you have so much knowledge about the car industry. Now we're working with Polestar electric vehicles. We know all about that industry. So if that relationship would not, would finish up, then we have so much insight about electric cars, so we would probably have another client. So it's not so much a Polestar I actually like, because they're amazing and cool people, but I love, like, when you solve a problem, the problem solving in a new creative way, to say, hang on, why can't we do this and that? And that's why it's so important when you come from the outside. From the inside, I just don't believe so much in in-house. You should always have a strong in-house department. But a lot of the problem solving comes from the outside, when you say, and you look at, like, you really look at the history of innovation. In almost every industry, people have come from the outside and say, hey, why don't you do it like this? And why don't you do it like that? Because, when you work in the same industry, there are some beliefs. It's almost like religion. People just believe it. You know what I mean? For example, I work a lot, and I've been very successful with car ads, like before, and now I work a lot with EVs, but even before that, I don't have a license. I'm 44. I've never driven. You know what I mean? How can a person who's never driven a car, has zero interest in cars, be so successful in automobile marketing? That says a lot about the outside in perspective, right? And then you look at the car as not a product, but as something bigger. When you come from the outside, you look at the holistic view of, what does the car mean? What does it mean for me who doesn't have it? What kind of restrictions do I have? What would I be? And then obviously it's not about me, you get an ask, but it's truly outside in perspective that I love, and solving these complex problems that I love.
And what is your biggest challenge?
It's always, maybe it sounds a little bit arrogant, but especially going into neuromarketing and psychology, bringing it into Norway, you're a little bit, you're running a bit further than your client, right? So my biggest challenge is and some people everyone's good at something. I'm very good at bringing in the new stuff, the new ideas. And also with the podcast, when I talk to you've listened to it a little bit, you see all these amazing people. These ideas are so niche and so much more forward in society. I think some of them will be mainstream in a few years. So in that sense, my work, part of my work is to look towards the future, to make sure this agency, that's why I brought in neuromarketing, predictive AI, to make sure not only for today, but to be robust in the future as well. So I think I'm a little bit more forward than a lot of our clients that are conservative, that are thinking about Q1, Q2. I understand there's someone breathing down their neck. Let's say the ice cream, the brief for the ice cream thing, we need to win this summer. Like, you know what I mean? This is the brief. We need to win. But sometimes I think the ideas that we have in this agency that I have are a little bit more forward than some of the conservative clients. So that's I think the most normal thing when you talk to people in the industry, is to that trust something. Sometimes when you come with something new, it's to say. So I can give you this example, for example, with the neuromarketing, most of our clients have been so fascinated. One did not get it, which is unfortunate, but they just didn't get it. It happens. And then quite a lot have jumped on it. And then quite a lot of the others are saying, this is so fascinating, but can we handle it? We're not. And then in the pitch, we showed it to Netflix, and Netflix was, yeah, cool. Yeah, the numbers, we have those numbers already. You know what I mean? It's really cool that you did it, but yeah, but we've been doing it pretty much since we started. So, Netflix is already there, a Norwegian client looks at it and says, this is exciting, but we're not ready. So always the challenge is to try to be avant-garde, but still not to be so much further than your clients. I think that's a bit of a challenge.
So this is a good transition to the last question. How do you see the future of marketing evolving over the next decade? What trends or technologies do you think marketers should be aware of?
Well, as you see, there's a lot of things happening, but I think marketing is pretty broken. There are some devastating numbers. I saw one from Harvard Business Review. You have to remember, I'm not talking about the Cannes winners. I'm talking about everything that is being created. There's this number from Harvard Business Review that shows that 99% of everything that is created does not create an impact on people, which is obviously, every day we are seeing so many of these ads. For me growing up in the 80s, 90s, advertising was a part of culture. I remember like 92 or something, a lot of my mates, not me, played basketball, and then Shaquille O'Neal, that old basketball player, he did dunk and he smashed everything. It was from Reebok. Everyone was talking about. I'm sure you think about maybe in Greece, maybe if not you, your parents, they remember those old ads. It was part of the popular culture. Today, advertising is the price you pay if you don't buy premium Spotify, premium YouTube, some of the streaming services, right? So when you look at those series like Mad Men, I mean, it's a series, but it was true. Like they were the coolest guys and the girls, mostly guys in the 60s, 70s, up to 90s. Ad people were the coolest people. They had the highest salary. They had the best clothing. They were like the magicians of the business. You know what I mean? Business world. And a lot of time they also sat in boards of directors that you don't see anymore. There are very few marketers today in the board of directors. So it was something a bit mystical and creative, then turned to become very strategic, and now it's more operative than strategic. And what is our response? This is and you and me are part of the same this Nordic hub for marketers, which I'm grateful that they put it up and it's cool. But I see there are so many people, they call themselves growth hackers. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't have a problem, and I understand what growth hacking, but then again, like, what the hell, man? It's like almost like the shittier marketing goes, the more buzzwords we create for ourselves. First of all, you work with marketing, we're all growth hackers. Like the job is to grow. I just explained, like our economy is about to grow. But it feels like marketers is about putting lipstick on a pig. It's never been worse. It's very little creative right now. It's more about the CEOs and optimization, and I think we're optimizing a lot of shit. I've said it before, like a lot of shit. And there's less and less time and money that goes into insight, and more about channel use and optimization. And the proof is there. It's not my opinion. It's not working. You can look at all the stats that it's just not hitting people most of the time. Going back towards it, I think again, that's why I put money where my mouth is. I went and studied those stuff. I went and transferred my agency that I part own, to become a neuromarketing agency, because I think the future is much more psychology, much more deeper understanding. And here's an interesting, when you go into the world of neuromarketing, and when you see how you can truly affect people, you don't need to shout as much. You don't need to always be visible. So I hope the future of marketing is more relevance, that it feels more relevant. And it's less because it works better. You just don't need to spray paint the whole town with your shitty logo and then just push your products. You know what I mean? That we can try to have a communication that feels relevant. I don't say this is where it's going to be, but I think it's going to be a very good place to be if marketers, first of all, are the ones, why should a marketer sit in a board of directors? Why should marketers be high-level advisor like McKinsey consultants? Because they should be the people in the room who have the best knowledge about humans, humanities, individual behavior, group behavior, theories of psychology, testing those theories. That's why I love buzzword, but I love neuropsychology. You take the ideas of psychology, behavioral insight, you test it neuroscientifically to see in that context, does it work? For example, we did loss aversion for food waste, it worked. We did loss aversion for a bank, it didn't work. That context was wrong. So I think the future of marketing hopefully is more relevant. And I think marketing can be in a beautiful place where people can be really proud to work with it and actually serve a purpose if it, with creativity, with strategy, with psychology, helps you and I as consumers to make the best choice of ourselves. Because we still want to buy, we still want to consume, although hopefully less, but maybe more relevant. So that we're still going to buy stuff, but we buy the stuff that we like, that gives us happiness, that give us meaning and purpose, and so on and so on. So I think the future should be to understand decision making, to understand psychology, to understand subconscious. And when we do that, even for the business part of it, we don't need to shout, we don't need to buy as much media space because we are relevant. And it's going to be the kind of marketing you want to look after. Because also being a consumer today is really confusing. What is sustainable? What is good quality? Just an example, is Prada good quality if I buy a pair of pants from Prada? It costs 500 euros. Would it last longer? Or is it just the brand? Okay, there are some, because I worked in fashion, there are some Italian fashion labels that are actually handmade for that price. It lasts much longer. I have these handmade shoes, I've had them for 14 years. I redo them. I bought them for 400 euros. For example, I could buy one for 100 euros from H&M, but it lasts a few months. So these are the things you can help people. You know, maybe you invest more in a pair of handmade shoes and it looks better. You have them much longer. It looks beautiful. It just gets better with age. It's even better for your back. You know what I mean? So you see the potential we have to be more relevant. And hopefully marketing in the future is in a place that helps me as a consumer to take better decisions for myself instead of just optimizing shit and screaming and yelling because that's what's happening.
Yeah, these things are part of master programs, for example, and when you go to university, you have some courses about these things. But I feel like when marketers graduate and find a job, we just go into tactics and reading about how to do this and that. So, do you have any favorite resources that you could suggest to people if they're interested in reading more?
I think that the best inspiration for marketing is to go outside of marketing, to look at humanities, to look at social science, to look at all the humanities studies and social science. And then from there you understand that you're just optimizing wrongly infrastructure. So I think you take the best inspiration outside of marketing. And I'm very critical. Like, for example, right now, I studied a few years ago, like it was now almost a decade, 15 years. So it's quite a long time. But even with Norway, I've had some not like arguments with academics here because it's the same thing. You say there are some courses. So now we advised a new master's program that will be 80% different types of psychology, the 20% storytelling. This is the new master's program because the previous master program, it's infrastructure, like you said, tactics and infrastructures. So it starts with academic. Like I said, there are some courses, but I don't think the courses are really, really, you touch a little bit on that. I think tactics is the last thing you're going to use. Like, for example, imagine a football team. That infrastructure is your stadium, right? Today, a stadium is very important for a football team because it generates a lot of money. But a football team is so much more. It's your history, it's your logo, it's the players that you have, it's the quality of the grass, it's a stadium, it's the country you're in. It's so much more. But we are so much focused. That's like being a football manager and only focusing on your stadium and nothing else. You know what I mean? So I think it starts with the academics. I think they're doing it wrong. And I think that anyone who wants to be a good marketer should stop thinking about all these optimization tools, because these are the things you can learn within an hour or two, or just, if not an hour or two, or a week or so, depending on like all the time we have new tools here and they come and teach us, and but to understand the basics of human decision making, that is something else. And I think that has to be studied much, much more than it does today. You said different marketing schools have different, but they touch upon it. But I feel that from the marketing schools that I know today, it's much more about the infrastructure, like you said, and it's about the tactical part, which is crazy. So lastly, I can say I had a pitch for a very big brand here in Norway. And I think Norway is lagging even behind rest of the world when it comes to this. I had 117 keynote slides. 117 keynote slides that the client gave to me to go through about their brand. 2 slides was about the consumer. The rest was about them. So if a brand was a human being, you could call that brand a total psychopath. That is like you and me going on a date, and for 58 minutes, I only talk about myself. And then towards the end of the date, we're leaving. Is what's your name, by the way? You know what I mean? That's what it looks like to me. So I think the future, we need to have much better understanding of humanities, the brain, and the infrastructure is very irrelevant and something that can be fixed when the campaign is already done. It's not irrelevant, but it comes towards the end. Like when you start with a football team, it's important to have a stadium, but there are 100 other things you have to have before focusing on only your stadium. So I have to be clear. The tactical, the optimization is immensely important, the way marketing works today and all the channels that we have. But yeah, shit in, shit out, right?
Yeah. What is a book to start with? What is your favorite one on this?
I like all the behavioral insights books. I think it's are interesting. Like just the book Nudge. And I think the Nudge book is a good place to start. And I think my favorite book when it comes to psychology so far is How to Change Minds. I can't remember the name of the author, but it's a journalist who wrote it. He had looked at the biggest experiments done in America when it comes to the LGBTQ community, who've been very successful, who changed people's mind in a very short time, and how people's minds were changed. It's really fascinating. It's the best book I've read. It's not about marketing, but it's about marketing because it's about decision making and changing behaviors. And hopefully when people read that, they can also put it into doing something positive. But yeah, start with nudge, start with how minds change, because that's what marketing is, isn't it? It's about preferences and decision making. Yeah. And that doesn't start with channels and calling yourself growth hackers. That's by having a deep sympathy and empathy and understanding of humans.
Amazing. Thank you so much. This was a really interesting conversation.
Well, thank you for having me. I know it's your first episode, but I see you're a natural at this, and
Thank
yeah,
you.
thanks for having me. And I'm looking forward to following and see who more you talk to, and maybe I'm sure you're going to find a lot of people who disagree with me as well. So that's going to be
That's
good for
okay.
your podcast.
Great. Thank you, Babak.
Thank you.